Welcome to How Hard Can It Be? The podcast where we explore AI one question at a time.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to How Hard Can It Be? Our podcast on all things AI. Today's guest is Jerry Silber. He's an adjunct professor at Pace University Law School and a former Verizon Deputy General Counsel. So he's a former colleague of mine, which makes me even more excited. He turned to AI policy and AI ethics advocacy. So Jerry serves on the AI 2030 Governance Committee, and he actually has earned recognition as the AI 2030 Advisor of the Year for his leadership in responsible AI. He's the author of AI and the Law and an expert in AI governance, contracts, IP, data security, and emerging risks around autonomous systems. Today, we'll dig into the legal side of Agentic AI, what legal frameworks, liability models, and governance mechanisms need to resolve for systems that act on their own. So, without further ado, let's get started. Great to have you on the show, Jerry.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, as I said, without further ado, let's jump right into it. So you spent nearly 3 decades at Verizon as Deputy General Counsel, and now you lead, you're leading voice in AI policy and teaching AI policy. So what sparked your transition, your interest, your passion for AI ethics and governance?
Yeah. So again, thanks for having me. For me, it really was more of an evolution, honestly, than the hot cut. Right. Yeah. I've had a fulfilling career in private practice, and after that, at Verizon itself, leading a team of legal professionals, lawyers and non-lawyers. We were doing things like complex tech outsourcing deals, but parallel to all of that, um, for most of that time, I also was teaching at local colleges and universities, teaching things in media law and ethics. So I'll just give you a little flavor of it. We talked about in some of the classes the First Amendment rights of broadcasters. And I'll tie this all together in a minute. First Amendment rights of broadcasters actually was the topic for my thesis in graduate school. Another class we would talk about marketing law issues and the ethical considerations of direct-to-consumer advertising for prescription drugs. By the way, only allowed in the US and New Zealand. No other country even allows that. Another podcast maybe someday. We even looked at the impact of marketing certain products to marginalized communities. So how does that get me to AI, really because of the incredible potential to level the playing field across so many areas, including the First Amendment. I like to think of the First Amendment as a marketplace of ideas, not my phrase, certainly. It's been around for a while, but you can chart an evolution from early attempts to expand that marketplace to where we are now. And hopefully AI might really achieve what earlier technologies were not able to. Take you through just a little bit of history here. I'll be brief. The concept of this marketplace of ideas, everyone gets to voice their opinions in this marketplace, and truth with a capital T somehow emerges. It's been around for a long time, and technology has always had a place in trying to open up that marketplace to new and different ideas, certainly ever since the printing press, right? I think back to the early days of cable TV I when I was in university. There was a rule that cable companies had to open up certain channels for public access so that individuals and schools and governments could get airtime. The idea was simply to expand that marketplace of ideas, give people a platform to exchange their thoughts. Honestly, it didn't really work, right? There were not many people using those channels and even fewer watching them. The internet arrives then, and for a while it felt like this was the big breakthrough we've been waiting for. Suddenly, anyone could start a blog, they can make a video, even host a podcast, right? And it really seemed like this might be the way out, to even things out. But then we hit a snag, right? Not everyone has high-speed internet, or the tools to fully participate. I just was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal. Rural internet is still so bad, some states are turning to outer space, right? Now we're stepping into the age of AI, and this could be and hopefully will be the next huge leap. Give you two quick examples. Taiwan has a platform that uses ML to gather citizen responses on issues like telemedicine, for example, and
Mhm.
ride sharing. And get this, the government actually acted on over 80% of the issues that were discussed. That's pretty powerful. So when I go from writing college essays about public access TV to caring about broadband policy to AI ethics, that's why you'll excuse the pun, it's all interconnected, right? We've been striving for decades to give everyone a real voice, and AI may just be the best shot yet at reshaping the world to work for everyone.
Right. I love that. Although one thing I've learned in my career, everything comes at a cost, right? And I don't want to go on a tangent, but as you mentioned it, I can't resist. I'm a big fan of Yuval Harari and his book Nexus, where he talks about information through time and how it influenced, and it goes all the way back to biblical times, and he makes this wide arc ultimately to artificial intelligence. But one of the points he brings up is the simple fact that more information does not necessarily lead to truth. So I love your example about, I think it was Taiwan, right? It's a positive
Yes.
example how
Yeah.
there's incremental benefit to tech and citizen participation. But the other big concern I have is obviously the unprecedented amount of information which is not equal truth, coupled with
Yeah,
machines
it,
that make mistakes, that hallucinate, right? So you have now this weird situation where it is an unprecedented state of access to information and democratization, but at the same time you have, the large language models basically gobble up everything they find in the internet, and we know, how much misinformation and other issues that persists in these data sets. So do you agree that there is a price to pay, and that all these benefits you outlined ultimately come also with significant risks, ethical, responsible, safety, security, and if we ignore them, it's going to tilt to some degree?
yeah, I mean, it's a theory, right? It's a goal to shoot for. We all know that in the marketplace of ideas, if you will, the people with all the money are the ones who get their ideas out there for the most part. And, you know, um, the idealistic goal is that truth will emerge. We all know that's not necessarily so, and I think you're right. And yeah, I think maybe we'll talk about this a little later. There certainly are risks involved in this new technology, and the fact that people don't understand that as a part of the technology, it's going to make mistakes. It's not a bug. Right, and I kind of learned this over the last 6 months or so. It's not a bug. It's just part of the technology, and people, especially lawyers, are so used to just taking it at face value, right? They've got to understand that they need to take it and then check it yourself. One person explained to me how they allow students to use the technology in school. Right? You've got to do your own first draft. Then you can run it through AI for any other ideas. At the end of the day, though, the third time you look at it, that's got to be yours again, and you are responsible
Right.
for the work product.
So
Kind of like
augmenting
that.
it rather than replacing it, and to your point, still being not only the author originally but also the responsible party for the content.
Exactly. Kind of like the idea of it being a sandwich, if you will. One layer, then a second layer, then another layer on top.
Which is a great segue to agentic AI, right? So now that we all had our oracles and chatbots, we are moving into a space and time where we start to move agency, significantly more agency, right, to machines, to agentic workflows. Let's do a simple side by side. What gets you most excited about agentic AI, and what gets you most worried about agentic AI?
Yeah. I mean, I think the potential for agentic AI to open up um, uh, legal services to so many more people who cannot really afford it now. That gets me excited for Agentic AI. At the same time, there is concern about um, agentic AI going off on its own, right? A minimal amount of supervision, if any. That's my understanding of, the difference between Gen AI and agentic AI. Well, lawyers in the US and elsewhere um, are being held accountable for citing incorrect cases or citing cases that don't even exist or cases that don't apply to the proposition that they stated for. Um, and they're being fined big dollars by judges who are tired of this already. Um, it concerns me when you talk about agentic AI, um, how much further this will go. Right? There are also concerns about um, whether or not uh, agentic AI even falls within the boundaries of the rules of ethics of the American Bar Association,
Mhm.
right? Which requires uh, a lawyer to oversee the work of a non-lawyer, whether it's a paralegal or even a junior lawyer. Where's the oversight for agentic AI? So that's really a concern. And how do lawyers even bill for the agentic
That's
work?
a good
All right,
point.
something that lawyers care a lot about, the death of the billable hour. I was just at a seminar the other day about the death of the billable hour and how more and more companies are asking for fixed fees because they know, and it's been disclosed to them, that AI is being used to cut down on the amount of time that something ordinarily would take, right? I mean, you draft a services agreement, right? Ordinarily, just a first draft would take X number of hours, right? It can take 15 minutes now,
Yeah.
right? So, um, it's a brave new world out there, and I think that eventually the Bar Association will speak about agentic AI. They haven't really addressed it yet, as far as I know. They've addressed AI in general, and they've told lawyers that as a requirement within the duty of competency, they also have to understand the technology that they are using. And I'm not sure that all lawyers really understand the technology that they are using at this point. Um, but they should, because there've been some warnings out there already. Yeah, those are just a couple of thoughts on it.
No, I think you're spot on. But I also think this will present a conflict eventually. So the majority of clients we work with on agentic AI have a human in the loop currently. So the agentic workflow operates, and at some point there's a human in the loop who says this looks good or this doesn't look good, right? Or even provides feedback so that the agent learns, and with the next iteration it obviously improves. But keeping the human in the loop forever erodes the cost and efficiency and time advantages of the agentic system. So my point is, at one point you will have to let it go, let it loose, to fully benefit from speed and ultimately productivity and cost savings. But then the human in the loop is gone. So do you foresee a future where the regulatory body, for example, a bit like the EU AI Act, horrible word to say, starts classifying things in risks and starts putting up minimum requirements? Like, to your point, right? You can have a paralegal agent, but the lawyer still needs to read the full output before it can be processed. Versus you automate an IT service management process. There it is acceptable eventually after training and validation to let the agent run loose.
Yeah. To me, and I certainly don't have all the answers, but one thought that I have in response to what you just said, Alex, is the need for disclosure. Right. You mentioned that I teach a class over at the university over here at Pace's law school. Um, And one of the most impactful lessons was when, and it's a class on drafting legal documents. And we spoke about the impact that AI has on contracting. One of the most impactful lessons we had was when I had the students read terms of service of 4 different Gen AI services that were active in legal drafting or research. Um, and every one of them had algorithmic risk terms in their service agreements. They made it clear AI makes mistakes.
Hmm.
The vendor isn't liable for these mistakes, of course. And ultimately, in the end, it's up to the customer, or in our case, the lawyer, to ensure the accuracy of the results. Um, so I think that the more agentic AI is used, I think proof and attribution are going to be a key in litigation down the road, right? And so what we are seeing is some best practices emerge, like who's maintaining the prompt logs and the output records, and is there a clearly defined chain of control? Um, it's important to remember that while AI might draft the deal, humans still own the consequences.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I had an interesting conversation with a client this morning where we talked about AI augmenting humans, but we kind of concluded there will be a use case or an area where humans will augment AI, where AI itself is powerful, but you would not want it unhuman augmented, if that is a word, right? And I see both sides, right? I see the AI augmentation of human tasks and the other direction, to exactly your point, in the legal practice. Um, Before we go into liability and whether we can look at an agent like an employee and what this means for companies, and liability, which I think is an interesting and herring topic as well, I'd like to touch on regulation. And you touched on it when you said, technology is becoming increasingly complex and hard to comprehend for non-technical audiences. And I don't ask me the name of the senator, but I will never forget this. I think it was the first Zuckerberg hearing on Facebook. Remember when the senator said, "Mr. Zuckerberg, how do you make money?"
I
And
do remember that.
it really
I do
stayed with me
remember
because
that.
it showed this gap between the legislative body, their understanding of tech, and what's happening in this case in social media, right? This was long ago. Now we are talking about AI and agents and autonomous systems. Is it even realistic to expect the legislator to come up with effective regulation for that space? And I don't mean this disrespectful. I just mean this in a
Oh.
practical sense.
Um, so I certainly hear you. The big concern I've got is this regulatory lag, right? The law just takes a long time to catch up with technology. Look, in the telecom space, right? We are dealing with a 1934 statute amended in 1996. Think about how much the telecom space has changed in 30 years. AI is moving at lightning speed. So um, it may be idealistic, but I think we need to educate the lawmakers who frankly have other things on their plates. And as you mentioned, based on what we saw in the testimony of Zuckerberg, they have no idea about Facebook or the internet then. And to your point exactly, now I don't even know if some even know what agentic AI is, let alone what the risks are. Um,
Just listen to the hearing of this TikTok CEO. That will tell you. I think that
yeah.
was also interesting. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, no, it's fine. So, but the law is designed for humans, right? And AI just doesn't think the way humans do. It processes patterns and understands some principles, but um, it doesn't really understand the way humans do. And so there's this mismatch that we see. The human, our legal system is built on these concepts of duty. The duty of a doctor that a doctor owes to a patient, right? Or intent. Did I really intend to harm this person, or was it an accident? Or what's the foreseeability that if a shopkeeper does not shovel the snow off the walkway,
Mhm.
that someone's going to slip and get hurt, right? So I think that AI can mimic this reasoning, but it really can't be held accountable in the way that the law would require.
Right.
I've heard bots called thoughtless people pleasers. I kind of like that phrase. It cannot evaluate their own output. I wish I had come up with that phrase, thoughtless people pleasers. Uh, the concern is autonomy without accountability, right? And I think that's dangerous, right? When AI makes independent decisions, whether in hiring or whether in lending, these decisions can have serious, long lasting consequences. And if no human is accountable, that erodes the rule of law that we all are so used to. So I think that responsibility has to be traceable, even if the decision making itself is automated.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And by the way, I'm not sure you read the couple weeks back, Anthropic reported on its AI's behavior after being told it's going to be shut off. And the behavior was erratic, to say it in a diplomatic way. It was scary, actually, right? And that's the problem, right? If you train these models on the entire content of the internet, you kind of implicitly inherit human behavior, the good and the bad. And to your point, the law was made for human beings, or as we nerds say, carbon-based units. Do you think this is gonna be the case 5, 10 years from now? And I'm not talking about Asimov's philosophies on when should a robot have rights and things like that. The simple fact, I'll give you an example. We talked to a media company the other day, and the CIO shared with us that they're thinking of replacing up to 3,000 editors worldwide over the next 2 to 3 years. So could the argument be made that after that they might have 1,000 agents, right, that operate semi or fully autonomously? And if the law was made for humans, what does this mean for that company in sense of intellectual property, liability? What if the agent goes really, really bad? Can I assume, or can we assume, that the company will be fully liable, like they would be for an employee's behavior? How should we look at that?
I think that we have to. I don't think that we can live in a world where agents can do whatever they want to do without the responsibility being um, pulled in to the company that creates and that programs the agents, right? I mean, there's got to be some responsibility. Um, Someone has to be held accountable for the actions of the agent. This needs to be updated in the law, though, right? There are some areas where maybe we can borrow from here, borrow from there. So product liability, for example, um, may be helpful. A plaintiff could argue that the defendant failed to take reasonable measures in training or deploying the agent to mitigate what was a foreseeable harm, right? Or that the warnings there were defective, or the manufacturing was defective. These are all concepts in product liability. You have agency and tort law, which might be useful, but they really weren't designed with these autonomous algorithms in mind. I tried to make this point in an article I wrote on whether an AI system could be held liable in a libel suit. So if you're going to defame a public figure, the legal standard is actual malice. How do you prove that a bot had actual malice against the public figure, right? How do you prove that they've got that mindset? You really can. There was another article by a professor at Cal Law at Pace University that rightly noted that a chatbot company owner can be held accountable under several theories, including one that allows plaintiffs to hold employers liable for negligent acts of their employees.
Right.
We don't know that that's going to be a winner. We don't know if the agent is going to be deemed to be an employee. But I don't think we can live in a world where the agents can go off and do things, and there not be any repercussions, ramifications for the actions. Um, Again, you can think of it in terms of a defamation, right? Chat box spits something out that is incorrect and harmful. Um, you can go after the company that repeated it, right?
Right.
So, and the same thing would go for copyright infringement, right? You republish the infringement, you can go after the republisher, but none of this changes the need for a fresh look at the law, given the rapid evolution of AI. We're kind of grasping, maybe we can use some of copyright law, maybe we can use some of this. We really don't know how it's all going to work out. And I mean, I think the time has come for a fresh look at all of this.
You mentioned reasonable effort. That really resonates with me in sense of, I remember in the cybersecurity, when we worked together at Verizon, one thing we would often say to customers is, nobody can expect you not to be breached, but it should be expected that your cybersecurity posture is proportional to the risk that is inherent with a breach, right? So if I move that to AI, your point is, nobody can be expected to operate in AI that is completely, faultless. But you have to demonstrate that you're putting the respective safeguard and measures in place, reasonable effort. If the model still, in 1 out of 100 cases, hallucinates, and you still had reasonable efforts in place to prevent it as much as possible, based on what you just said, in that case, the company would not be liable. But could the company go to the model operator and say, your model, OpenAI hallucinated, and therefore I'm faced with a, question of liability?
I think that again, we don't know. I mean, it's a great analysis, and I taught you well. I'm happy to see that. Um, I, I think nothing is bulletproof. We all know that. You go to a doctor for an operation, no doctor is going to promise you a perfect outcome, right? They're going to use their best efforts and not be negligent, et cetera. And so I think that's really what we're talking about here as well. Um, again, I get back to the disclosure, right? If you're promising them that this agent is going to be able to do everything 100% accurately and never have a problem, and it goes off the rails, then I think you may have an issue, right?
Right.
But if you're, upfront
Transparent.
about it, yeah, and I think that transparency is extremely important here, and documenting it as well. All right, here is exactly. That's why I think that contracts are super important in making sure that the disclosure is documented. Right,
Yeah.
here's what we're going to do. I've seen some language in some recent contracts that say the parties may use AI tools for document preparation, for example, but all legal obligations and decisions still must be human reviewed.
Mhm.
Or again, just in terms of drafting contracts, AI generated terms are non-binding unless ratified by authorized personnel.
Right.
So you've got to, I don't see a world where it's going to be entirely, agentic. Um, Maybe I'm not smart enough to foresee that, but in
I
my
doubt it.
mind, I can see areas where we'll see more and more of agents working and saving time. And, yes, some people who don't know how to work with agents are going to lose their jobs. That's a whole other type of conversation, though, right? Your point. And we're seeing some announcement being made by some companies who are being frank about it. Others are saying, no, you'll just have to learn to work
Nothing to
with
see
the
here.
AI. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that there's always going to be some way of holding a human responsible for the acts of the agent.
Right. Under the simple logic that the agent ultimately was created, profiled, configured by a human or an organization, right? So to your point, you can trace it back to its roots. And I have to ask you this, and I might open Pandora's box, so I apologize up front, right? You saw Grok's, Elon Musk's X model Grok, right? Got into the news by, producing anti-Semitic slurs and even posting it on X and calling itself, I think, Mecha Hitler. It was really bad, right? So if you look at Grok, Anthropic, and OpenAI, the big difference is, Elon Musk was very vocal about First Amendment, freedom of speech, the town place, and this kind of uses this kind of terminology, versus OpenAI and Anthropic, who spent a lot of effort in providing guardrails within the models. His argument is First Amendment, free speech. That's what Grok's purpose is, to be non-bound by limitations on free speech and so on and so forth. Is that true? Should we look at that, or is there an element where we say, well, yes, but there should be limitations? There have to be limitations in the degree of freedom that, in this case, a large language model can express itself.
Yeah, look, even in the human case, the First Amendment doesn't mean you can say anything to anyone at any time, right? There are always time, place, and manner restrictions that we need to look at. Uh, Hate speech, for example, is not covered under the First Amendment. Obscenity is not covered under the First Amendment. Where to draw the line, that's what judges are for,
Before.
right? But certainly, if someone is saying, I'm going to create a space where anybody can say anything, I'm going to threaten the president of the United States, for example, or I'm going to advocate, a bomb at this place at this time. I mean, I don't think that is covered by the
It's
First
covered.
Amendment. That's not what our founders were looking for when they created the First Amendment. It's for political speech, exchange of ideas. That's what the First Amendment really was about. I mean, even advertising had to fight for a long time to get some measure of First Amendment speech, or the protection, rather. The sort of speech that we're talking about now falls way under the bar there.
Right. So
You know,
we should hold these models technically, obviously, accountable to the same standard.
I think so.
Perfect. Final question. And I'd love to have you back 6-8 months, because I'd like to see, how fast we are moving, whether it's from a legal, regulatory, or other perspective. But my final question is really a ask for how you would advise enterprises, corporations who are now all racing to Agentic AI. What should they be? How should they start looking at the legal landscape and requirements to ultimately put agentic workflows into production?
So I think that governance really is the foundation there. Before you can start negotiating contracts or even assessing what type of insurance you need, I think you need to understand what the AI is going to do. How is it going to act, independently of humans, and who's responsible if it goes off script, right? I think with that sort of governance, then, let me put it this way: if you don't have that governance, then legal documents, as much as I love them, it's just paperwork. And insurers won't even know what they're even insuring. So you need the conversation to talk about the scope of authority that the agent will have, um, what decisions are expected of the agent, and very importantly, what decisions are explicitly prohibited,
Mm-hmm.
right? Human oversight, right? Who's going to be accountable for supervising the AI? And is there an escalation path if the AI fails or starts to behave in a wonky type of way? That's not a legal phrase. Are there hard stops or constraints that are, encoded? Is there a kill switch, right? We spoke about the need for being able to audit, right? Are there inputs, outputs, and what's being logged with timestamps? Um, Make sure the logs are being kept in such a way so that if necessary, and we hope not, but if necessary, they can be used as evidence. Um, what sort of risk assessments have been done. I mean, there's just a lot of conversations that you have to have at the outset. I know people want to jump right into it, right? Um,
I call
but
it techno optimism.
okay, but I think you need to have these kind of upfront conversations so that everybody knows where the boundaries are. You need, if you have contracts, you're updating your contracts, so the third party is going to know that they're interacting with an autonomous agent. Um, Terms of use, if it's customer facing, right? And then once you've had this all figured out, then you can talk to your underwriter and tell your carrier what you're thinking about. But I think you have to have these fundamental conversations first, Alex.
And then to wrap it up and to close the loop, from a board perspective, the question should be, are the efforts to safeguard, secure, be compliant, and govern, can they be looked at as being effective and relative to the risk that a failure of the bot, for example, would result in?
Relative to the risk and from the perspective of the board, relative to whatever best practices are starting to emerge, right? I
Yeah,
think
that's a good
board
point.
members, it's incumbent on the board members to know what others are doing, what regulators have said is required. We've seen this in cyber as well, right? The banks have been told, here's what you need to comply. I think eventually we'll see the same thing in, agentic AI.
Perfect. Jerry, it was such a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving us the time. And as I said, I'll try to get you back in 6 to 8 months so we
Okay.
can kind of, do a retrospect of, as this was our first conversation on AI and the law, what actually happened and what has changed. Thank you very much, Jerry.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Alex. Always great to talk with you.
Today's podcast is brought to you by AIceberg. In just 5 minutes, AIceberg becomes a guardian agent that oversees all AI traffic, enforces policies, and protects your enterprise from AI breach. Learn more at aiceberg.ai.